We want to start with Syracuse, of course, and get your thoughts on, through two games. They test themselves out of conference against Tennessee down in Atlanta, and then they struggle with UConn, but found a way to get the win. What are your impressions of this team through two games?
Yeah, I think pretty much on target for what I expected from them. Obviously a lot of roster turnover in the offseason and, replacing prolific offense and on all the key pieces that were in it with the amount of roster turnover is not easy. So I figured there would be some struggle, but I think Angele has looked pretty good. And, the offense hasn't done a bad job necessarily. I just think, it's not easy to win against Tennessee. And certainly the game against UConn, I think UConn is probably a little better than people give them credit for. So I think they're pretty much where I expected them to be to this point.
With that being said, do you expect this team to make it to a bowl game? You know the schedule. You know it's really tough. Do you think they find a way to get to 6 wins?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge, obviously. I mean, you got to play at Clemson. I know Clemson hasn't looked good to this point yet, but, they've got a lot of guys that key guys that have been out for them, including Antonio Williams. He'll probably be back by that game. SMU, not an easy place to play with Rhett Lashley's offense, the amount of points they've put up, but they've also been giving up a ton of points. Miami and Notre Dame, those are probably the two toughest games on paper left for them, having to go on the road to both of those places. So it's going to be close. I think they're right around a 6-6, 5-7 type team. Boston College has looked pretty good to this point, so that's a tough way to sort of end the year. And Pittsburgh certainly is a challenge. So I think they could be right there on the precipice of making a bowl going into that Boston College game.
I'm sure you saw this, the win sprints after the UConn game that have made national headlines. What's your take on it? It seems like everybody's got an opinion, whether it was, he's trying to send a message. Some others have said that it was for show, and they've been negative about it. What do you make of the win sprints after the UConn victory?
I loved it. I mean, listen, I coach girls soccer. All right. That's my experience coaching girls soccer and girls basketball here in South Florida. I've got 2 daughters that play the sport, and we've won games, and, coaches, including me being on the staff, we've made them run sprints afterward because they didn't play well. And I get it. There was an audience in the stadium, and, Greg Olson's entitled to his opinion, but I really feel like anytime you can have a teaching moment, with young athletes and have a level of discipline with them and establish it. I'm sure that those guys have a lot of respect for Fran Brown, and I don't know that they were necessarily embarrassed by having to run sprints afterward. It's something he certainly has made them probably do in practice plenty when they screw up. Greg Olson's entitled to his opinion, but I thought Fran Brown handled it well. I had no problem with what he did.
So we asked Fran about it yesterday, and I believe you've seen his response that he said on our show about, he said, I don't know. I took it as I don't know Greg Olson personally, but, this is why we did it, and I'm worried about me, and I know he had a great career, but, I'm worried about me in my program. It obviously got quite a bit of backlash, especially from folks down in Miami. What were your thoughts about the comments and the backlash that Fran got from saying that yesterday?
Well, I mean, listen, Miami fans are going to support their own no matter what. The bottom line is, was it performative? I don't think so. And even if it was in any way, slight form. I mean, look, there's a lot of parents out there that want their players, want their sons and daughters to be coached hard. They want them to be, to get some level of discipline. And yes, it's a unique situation. We really haven't seen many coaches do this at the college or pro level, right? Where the public is around, reporters are around to see it and videotape it. But what's the big deal? Like, what did he do wrong? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. He wasn't, like, publicly shaming these guys and making them crawl on the ground and doing some sort of embarrassing, like, punishment. It was running sprints. Like, what's the big deal? I think it's a way overblown story. And, I think, the parents that are sending their kids to Syracuse because they like FRAN Brown, they probably like that. They probably like to see those guys win some trips.
Yeah, well said, Manny. All right, let's talk ACC, kind of big picture here and as a whole. And you brought up Clemson, so let's go there next. They lose the opener in a close game. Both offenses struggled against LSU, and then, they struggled for about a half against Troy, got their act together, and ended up winning by double digits. Are you worried at all about this Clemson team?
Well, I think going into the season, we all sort of felt like, well, what are they going to do at the running back position, right? Like, do they really even have a guy? And to this point, we've seen Adam Randall, converted wide receiver, do a decent job, averaging, just under 5 yards a carry, but they don't have a workhorse guy. And I don't know that any, their freshmen are honestly ready to assume that role. And so, I think if Clemson goes 9-3 again, and, they don't make it to the ACC championship game or they don't make it to the college football playoff, I think we're all going to sit here and say, well, Dabo should have taken a running back in the portal, right? We always criticize him for not attacking the portal enough. I think it's pretty obvious that they could have used some experience at that position and not a converted wide receiver to go in there and handle that job. That said, I expect them to bounce back. I think once Antonio Williams is on the field, it's going to help their offense out tremendously. Right now, Cade Klubnik looks like a guy who doesn't have his favorite receiver on the field, and it looks sloppy. Maybe they were listening to all the headlines and everybody saying this is a top 5 team. They haven't played like one yet, but I wouldn't rule Clemson out and say they can't rebound and play better.
How about the ACC as a whole in terms of the non-conference performances to date? Week 1, they picked up some impressive non-conference wins, including Florida State beating Alabama, but they've also suffered some tough losses as well. North Carolina got smacked by TCU. Duke got routed at home by Illinois. Baylor knocked off SMU in double overtime. What do you make of the ACC? Do you think that they've taken strides through these first 2 weeks to improve the narrative around their conference, or are they just kind of sitting in a distant third right now behind the SEC and Big Ten?
Yeah, I think there's no question they're sitting a distant third, but there's more opportunities here. Florida State and Miami have to continue to play well, right? Miami's got USF this week, who's obviously the G5 darling right now, especially coming off the win over Florida. And so I think it's really important for the ACC's reputation for Miami to take care of business. I think Florida State, they're in a position where they look like the team we saw 2 years ago, right, win the ACC. So I think that, as long as those two programs are playing at a high level and then Clemson sort of gets their act together, we talk about the Big 12, who's sort of the third best conference. I think right now it's pretty evident it's the ACC because you've got 2 top 10 teams, 3 top 12 teams in the poll, whereas the Big 12 really doesn't have that. Utah's kind of their one team this year that's performed well every time out. Arizona State's coming off a loss. So I think all in all, it's pretty evident that the Big Ten and the SEC have the majority of the money and the majority of the best players.
You brought up Florida State, obviously off to a great start. Are you buying the Seminoles and I guess buying Tommy Castellanos as a Heisman contender? I mean, certainly not a Heisman front runner, but I mean he's been impressive through 2 games. Are you buying him as a potential contender?
Big contender. I think Florida State still has some more big games that they have to win. They've got to play Miami at home in a couple of weeks. They've got to play at Clemson. They got to finish the season at Florida. Who knows where Florida will be at that point. But I think, he's got the potential to lead them to as many as 10 or 11 wins this season. And will that make him a Heisman contender per se? I'm not sure. I think Gus Malzahn just always does a really good job as a coordinator, as a play caller, when he's got guys that do what he asks them to do. And I think Castellanos, let's not forget, he was recruited to UCF. When Malzahn was there. So there's a lot of familiarity. We've seen across college football when coordinators and quarterbacks have a really good relationship, doesn't matter what uniform they're wearing. If they travel together somewhere else, they're having some success. So I think as far as a legitimate Heisman contender, I'm not sure Castellanos is really going to be there in the end. I don't know that Florida State has the receivers and the big-time playmakers to put up his passing numbers, but certainly as a runner, I think they're going to be an effective offense. I think they got a chance to be right there in the playoff discussion at the end of the season.
Have there been any teams that have surprised you so far in the ACC? I mean, I'm looking at the standings right now. 8 teams are undefeated. Wake and Cal are both 2-0, but I don't think anybody's concerned about them. But of the other 6, Pitt, Louisville, is there anybody in that group that you think could truly contend with the Miamis and Clemsons of the world to win the conference this year?
I think Georgia Tech has a chance, and I think a lot of that has to do with Haynes King and Brent Pry and the job that he does with his guys at the line of scrimmage. I think they've done a pretty good job on both sides of the ball. They went out to Colorado week 1, won that game. Obviously, last week against an FCS team, they're gonna take care of business. But this week we'll find out if Georgia Tech is really a contender when they take on Clemson. I think if they win that game, then you have to automatically put them in the conversation for being in the race. I think SMU, I was worried about their defense coming into the season. They had to replace 9 starters off the number 1 defense in the league last year, and it's obvious that they're having issues there. So right now I would say it's Miami, it's Clemson, it's probably Florida State third, and then Georgia Tech is the team that piques my interest. I think Louisville's got a good team too, but and he certainly does a great job getting the most out of his guys, I think, on both sides of the ball. But I just think Miller Moss, to me, so far has not impressed me. I haven't sat there and thought, man, this is a guy that's as good as his predecessors. So he's got to show a little bit more to me here in the weeks ahead. But I think, Louisville might be in that discussion as well. I just don't see it right now.
All right, Manny. Great stuff. We really enjoyed having you on. Thanks for your time, and hopefully we can talk ACC football with you again later in the season.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again.
All right, Manny Navarro from The Athletic.